Let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking the intensely hyped 14-point peace deal between the US and Iran. And yeah, it was actually signed at the Palace of Versailles. Because, nothing screams relatable modern diplomacy quite like an 18th century French palace, right?
So we gotta ask the big question right up front. Can a short memorandum, which is basically just a slightly long email, actually solve decades of explosive geopolitical drama? Or is this just a super flimsy band-aid slapped over a massive crack in the wall?
Literally just 14 points. International diplomacy just tried to condense a totally destructive global conflict, one that completely derailed world energy markets, into a neat little bulleted list. I mean, if you've ever tried to settle a massive argument in a group project using a bulleted list, you know this is a pretty bold strategy.
Section 1. The hype. Let's start with the glossy surface level stuff politicians are currently taking their victory laps over. Point number 1 drops the absolute ultimate buzzwords: immediate and permanent termination of military operations. It essentially declares instant world peace on paper. Sounds amazing, right? Just sign it on a fancy antique desk and poof, the war is officially over. Well, if only we're actually that simple.
Section 2. The trade-offs.
Because when you look past the shiny hype, you find the real transactional compromises happening behind the scenes. Think of this like a wildly tense group chat agreement where both sides agree to back down just enough to get exactly what they want. The US agrees to end its naval blockade, issue oil waivers so Iran can sell crude oil, and unfreeze billions in Iranian assets. In return, Iran promises to use its, quote, best efforts to keep the Strait of Hormuz open for commercial ships for 60 days. And they promise, yet again, not to develop nuclear weapons. So it's a massive, high-stakes trade-off, heavy economic relief for the safe passage of global shipping.
Section 3. The vague nuclear status quo. Now we have to examine the glaring loopholes deliberately hidden in the fine print. Point 9 says Iran will maintain the status quo of its nuclear program until a final deal is reached, which is basically like your teacher grading your final exam purely on vibes. What exactly does status quo even mean if Iran recently cleaned up nuclear sites or beefed up security after military strikes? Literally nobody actually agrees on the definition of this phrase, but hey, they signed it anyway just to get a deal out the door. And this is a massive retreat from the absolute demands the US made just a year ago in 2025. Back then, the demand was the total, complete dismantlement of Iran's enrichment capabilities. And now, Iran is allowed to just keep enriching uranium. Their highly enriched stockpile just has to be diluted down to 3.67% under IAEA watch. Completely ignoring all sorts of unwritten rules, they're essentially kicking the absolute hardest nuclear problems down the road because, well, it's just too difficult to solve them right now.
Section 4. The $300 billion question.
Let's look at point 6. The deal very casually mentions setting up a $300 billion, yes, that's billion with a B, dollar reconstruction and economic development fund for Iran. That is an absolute mountain of cash meant to repair the heavy damage caused by the conflict. But here is the hilarious catch. The United States isn't actually paying for it. The text says the US and regional partners will develop this fund. It is essentially a mandatory geopolitical GoFundMe. The US totally expects regional Gulf states to magically foot the bill for a country they were quite literally just fighting. I am absolutely sure they are thrilled to be opening their wallets for that one.
Section 5. Why everyone is mad.
You know, a diplomatic compromise is either legendary or totally terrible when both sides absolutely hate it. Let's look at Iran first. Hardliners are literally protesting in the streets of Tehran right now. MP Kamran Ghazanfari explicitly said claims of an Iranian victory are a blatant lie. They're calling the agreement a catastrophic capitulation. They feel that by giving up control of the Strait of Hormuz, their absolute biggest piece of leverage, their negotiators basically surrendered without even getting guaranteed long-term sanctions relief.
Meanwhile, on the U.S. side, Donald Trump frankly admitted he signed the deal because continuing the conflict risked a catastrophic global economic depression and a massive oil shortage. He outright said he did not want to be the next Herbert Hoover, the president blamed for the Great Depression. So the deal was signed out of sheer economic panic, not necessarily because it was some flawless strategic victory.
It is frankly wild to watch a simultaneous domestic backlash unfold in both Washington and Tehran over the exact same piece of paper. You have Senator Bill Cassidy calling it the worst foreign policy blunder in decades, and Senator Ted Cruz warning against funding lunatics. Then, at the exact same time, Iranian hardliners are trending a "we will not accept" hashtag because they think they got totally scammed. It's a rare moment of completely unified multinational anger.
Section 6. Will it actually work?
The crucial point here is comparing what this fancy piece of paper says to the chaotic reality on the ground. The deal demands an immediate ceasefire everywhere. Yet Iran says they are keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed until Israel stops military operations. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah, who weren't even part of this deal, are still actively shooting at each other. Hezbollah just fired 147 rockets, and the IDF killed over 100 fighters. And the U.S. and Iran? Oh, they are currently sitting in Switzerland arguing about who is supposed to act first to lift sanctions and end the blockade.
And to make matters infinitely more stressful, this entire fragile memorandum hinges on a ticking clock. 60 days. They have exactly 60 days to negotiate a final, permanent, bulletproof deal before everything could just go right back to the way it was.
Day 1 was the signing at Versailles. By day 30, the U.S. has to fully end its naval blockade. And on day 60, the free passage in the Strait of Hormuz expires, and that final permanent deal is due. Because, if there's one thing that historically solves 40 years of deeply rooted explosive geopolitical conflict, it's definitely putting negotiators on a high-speed crash course with a 60-day countdown timer. It's literally like cramming for the most important final exam in world history, except if you fail, the global economy tanks.
As we watch the clock violently tick down on this incredibly fragile Versailles mirage, you gotta wonder, what do you think will actually happen when those 60 days run out? Is 60 days enough to fix 40 years of history? Can a vaguely worded piece of paper actually hold back a war? Or are we all just hitting the snooze button on a massive global conflict? Definitely something to keep in mind as this story continues to develop.